Firstly, I'm indeed grateful to Dr. Leduc and the management of the Asian Center for accepting my paper. It brings back pleasant memories because I participated in the International Roundtable at Chiang Mai in 2013. Frankly, although I saw Dr. Eilis, he has also been he was an active participant in the International Association of Media Communication Researchers Working Group on Religion and Communication. Now, my presentation, and first of all, I would like to say greetings, shalom, from the Holy Land, from speaking to you from Jerusalem. Now, my paper attempts to examine how an ultra-religious community, a Jewish community in Israel, should we say negotiated, or perhaps we should say failed to negotiate the first months of the COVID-19 crisis, given that there was a conflict between what the rabbis said what they should do and what the Israeli medical authorities said they should do. I want to discuss this research, which was done together with two of my colleagues, who are Dr. Bruria Adini, who runs the Emergency Disaster Medicine Department at the faculty of at the Tel Aviv University, and Dr. Uwe Spitz of the Lev Academic Center, and also the academic advisor at the one of Jerusalem's leading hospitals, Shaarei Tzedek. So as I say, what I want to do is we want to try and look at the dilemma of the flow of communication between, on the one hand, the rabbis to the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel. Let me first briefly, though, before we go into the results of our research, and it was based on 405 interviews with the residents of one of Israel's biggest ultra-Orthodox towns, Bnei Barak, which is near Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv, of course, is almost the largest city in Israel, although Jerusalem is the capital. But before we go into the details of the survey and the statistics, I think it would be helpful if we briefly discuss the Haredi population themselves, the role of the rabbis, as well as the role of the media, which is a rather specialized media, because the ultra-Orthodox Jewish population in Israel are not generally exposed to the secular general media. So I'm going to briefly overview these, and then we'll be able to focus on some of the questions we have here. As you can see, table 1 and table 2 and table 3 in just a minute or so. I think I'm supposed to close this, am I? That's it. So the Haredim are ultra-Orthodox Jews, are very religious Jews, and they many of them study rather than work. The women go out to work. They have large families. They are isolated, if you want, divorced from Western non-Jewish influences in their homes. They account for 10% about of the Israeli Jewish population, and they also to be contrasted with the other 90% of the Israeli population, which comprises approximately of the 9 million Israeli Jewish population as a whole. If the Haredim are 10%, modern Orthodox, as opposed to ultra-Orthodox, and I'll explain this in a minute, the modern Orthodox account for about 20%. The secular Israel accounts for 40%. In the middle, you have about 35%, shall we say, traditional, more selective in their observance. And just to add, even though this is a picture in Israel, but so that participants can understand, this is not necessarily representative of the world Jewish picture, because in America, the other largest Jewish center, there are with an 8 million Jewish population, mostly in New York and Los Angeles, but also in other places. Their American jury only comprises a very small number of Orthodox Jews, both modern Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox, only some 10%, and the other two blocks are the Reform Jewish movement, and the conservative Jewish movement. The Reform is about 40% of American jury, and 30% are the conservatives. We don't have the time, and it's not of direct relevance to this paper to explain the theological, historical developments over 200 years of the non-Orthodox as opposed to the Orthodox. Suffice it to say, though, that in Israel, the Reform and the Conservatives have a much smaller representation, and they are not formally recognized, at least by the religious establishment, but there's, if you want, a struggle for them to win recognition from the government, which includes budgetary matters. Having said this, let us briefly describe the ultra-Orthodox, and they have their own separate media. They are not exposed to the general secular media. And when we discuss COVID-19, the role of information was very, very important, since whether it's in Israel or in any other countries, the mass communications are a primary, shall we say, channel for the medical authorities in a country to pass on information about COVID-19, which in March and April of last year was a sense of mystery about the nature, and there were no inoculations, and we didn't hear the words Moderna and Pfizer until much later. So the mass communication has a very important role, both in providing information as well as, if you want, comforting, perhaps clarifying certain issues. And so the nature of the Haredi media is given that the rabbis don't want their followers to be exposed. There's a ban on television. There's said many things in the general media, whether it's of sexual violence, gossip issues, which they don't want. So over the years, there has developed a separatist Haredi media for this population. Having said that, within the Haredi media, it's important to note there's the development over the last 70 years of the Haredi media, the alternative separatist media, shows some interesting features. And namely, whereas the media, the Haredi, I should say, daily papers were affiliated and are affiliated with Haredi political groups, there has been a reaction to, if you want, a censored type of media, and for the last 30 or 40 years, there's a sense of greater independence among Haredi news magazines, which have developed. Now there are 2 Haredi radio stations and even internet. Internet is a very important matter in looking at the Haredim. The Haredi rabbis imposed a ban on the internet, given that it's uncontrolled and that one has access to all sorts of matters which the rabbis thought not appropriate. Originally, 30 years ago, computers were banned in the Haredi community, but the recognition that the websites and new media are an integral part of modern life has resulted in quite a number of the Haredi rabbis recognizing that Haredi families also want to be linked up to the new media, and there are all sorts of controls, technological controls over access, but it's a continuing dialogue and conflict regarding the internet websites of the Haredim. So it's quite interesting when we now develop this paper, and I want to show you some of the results, for us to look at which media people looked at, and we also need to think of, how do I get the, I think I went, can I go to the next table? I think I pushed myself out, Dr. Leluc.
Just press down key.
The which key?
Down key.
Which key?
You can see on your keyboard there's a down key near the number of keys. There's a down key there.
Okay. Okay, so so now forgive me for that. So now let's go to 3 questions which I want to address in my paper. The first one concerns what was the exposure of the Haredim during the COVID-19 crisis. We did a case study, as I said earlier, of one of the largest Haredi town. We carried out 405 telephone interviews, 2 of my research assistants at Ariel University, to get a picture of the exposure to information, whether it's from the mass media, the Haredi media, as well as of the views of the rabbis, and whether it calmed them or not, and how they negotiated the dilemma between information they received from the medical authorities on the one hand and the rabbis on the other. And I think overall, this, if you want, this Israeli Jewish presentation here, which I'm bringing you, may well be similar to the types of dilemmas in other countries and other religious communities outside of Israel and the Middle East. Now, as I said at the very beginning, the nature of the Haredi media comprises, at the beginning here, we see institutional daily newspapers, then we have internet, then we have Haredi radio stations, there are 2 of them, and then also the Haredi News weekly magazines. Now, after that, it's interesting that we have secular news websites and secular daily newspapers because, and this is an important point to make, the Haredi media apparently did not provide enough information, adequate information, at least in the eyes of the respondents, and some 20% of them went into, shall we say, the forbidden media, as their rabbis would see it, and they went into the secular news websites, into the secular daily newspapers. So while in general, in normal times, most Haredim do follow the rules and satisfy themselves with the first 4 categories, namely the Haredi daily newspapers, the Haredi news websites, and the Haredi radio stations, the Haredi news weeklies, they felt this was inadequate. But yes, on the other hand, we see something very interesting here. As I said a few minutes ago, there's this internal tension within the Haredi media between the original daily newspapers, daily Haredi newspapers, Hamodia, Yeted Ne'eman, Hamavaser, and Peles. These are the Hebrew names of them, which are even more censored, and they have censors which check the copy each night, as opposed to the, shall we say, the slightly freer, slightly more independent, slightly more critical Haredi media, which has developed, namely the Haredi news weeklies and Haredi internet news websites. So I think it's very interesting that 32% of Haredim in our survey of 405 Haredim in the town of Bnei Barak did say that that the most important source for them was the institutional newspapers. And so it's also interesting on the one hand, on the other hand, the Haredi news weeklies, which were in 4th place, which provide back background, which expose, shall we say, corruption inside the religious, the Haredi world, are more freer, are not controlled in terms of content regarding information within the Haredi rabbinical leadership. Only 13% said that this was their major source of information. It could be, since these are weeklies, as opposed to the news websites, which are continuous 24-hour, 6-day operations. Of course, on the Sabbath, the Haredi media is completely closed. And the Haredi radio stations also, they were seen as more providing more immediate information. But I think the overall conclusion from this table 1 has to be that the poorly financed Haredi media need to do some assessment. Whereas they have political reporters, they also have, by the way, military reporters, given that the conflict and defense often comes up in the Israeli news agenda, unfortunately.
Dr. Cohen,
question of medical.
Dr. Cohen, you have about 9 more minutes.
Very good. They don't have medical reporters, and that's going to be one of our conclusions. Allow me go on to the next. There we are. Well, now let me go on to table 2, views concerning religious versus public health issues. We asked population of 405 respondents, what happens when you see a contradiction between medical guidelines from the Israeli Ministry of Health or the rabbinical guidelines? Now, I think at this stage I need to explain a further point. Social distancing is contrary to the way of life of Haredim. Haredim, like other religious Jews, indeed, like in other religions, recognizes the idea of communal worship. If churches are closed, if mosques are closed, ashrams, and so also synagogues were closed under the government authority instructions in March 2020 and April, right through till recently, following the inoculation. And most Israelis have had 3 inoculations already by today, but for the whole of last year, synagogues were basically closed, and communal worship is an important feature not only of Haredi life, but I would say of Jewish life. There's even, since I'm speaking to a religious audience, I can explain that there is an idea of the divine presence of God is more closer and more responsive to prayer, where prayer is conducted in a communal way, 10 men or 10 persons. And so therefore, when the government says no social distance, no socially meeting in the synagogues, and they closed the synagogues and prayers were held outside and are still held outside in some parts, this created a major dilemma, I should say a crisis of belief, particularly where the rabbi said, no, you need to show your faith. You need to come together for the daily prayer services. By the way, September is the month where the high holidays, the Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, as well as the Day of Atonement, the Yom Kippur services attract the biggest numbers, and the synagogues were closed, so not only, of course, inside Israel, but in other countries, including the United States. So the other feature of the problem of social distancing, I should add, is the studying the Holy Scriptures, notably the Talmud. By the way, the Talmudical colleges within the Haredi world are less focused on studying, by the way, the Bible, the prophets, and the 5 books of Moses, are more focused on studying Jewish religious law, halakha, Jewish religious law, and they study this in pairs, in groups together. they have religious classes. So again, if the government authority issue instructions that they must close the yeshivot, the Talmudical colleges, then again this creates a dilemma, particularly when you haven't got the cooperation and the of the rabbis who say uppermost you must show your belief and so on in a God. I should add just more recently, even before the creation of Pfizer and Moderna, rabbis were brought into line, shall we say, and it was explained to them, and given that Bnei Barak, for example, had a higher death casualty than other parts, I think the message finally sunk home. But anyway, let's go through some of these guidelines we see here. If contradictory, namely that if you see a contradiction between between the medical authorities' instructions and the rabbis' instructions, so you 3.5 of males have said you follow the medicals, whereas 3.66 said you follow the rabbinical ones. Was there a contradiction between rabbinical and medical rules? 3.4 said there was. By the way, a very large 74% said that there was a contradiction. They found personally a contradiction between the instructions they got from the two sets of authorities, namely the medical authorities and the rabbinical world. Then we go down, Jewish religious law in line with medical advice. Some people did say so. And then we go down, rabbinical leadership delayed medical recommendations. Here you have the Haredim themselves critical of the rabbis for failing to be more, shall we say, be more moderate and recognize this reality, this new reality in world history of COVID. Then you have the religious studies and observance protects from bodily harm. You see a very high number here, 4.3, seeing that belief, tefillah, prayer, and so on, mitzvot, the commandments and so on, are the way to ensure protection. And then we also have preventive medicine may interfere with religious leadership. Let me go to the last table, which I would like to share with you. The overall interesting question is, did the level of information have calm you or not? And most of the information, of course, came via the media, which goes back to our first table. And we see here something really alarming and of great concern, which must concern to, I would say, the PR, the public relations efforts of the Israeli medical authorities, the Ministry of Health, the government, and so on. We see here that people did panic, and we see here that almost just under 80% of people were either confused or were slightly anxious or were very concerned about where things were going. In other words, public information needs to address how they function in a time of national, shall we say, international crisis, and only 10% said it had no impact on them. And only if we take the idea of the media is providing information. I mean, the media is in the modern world is not supposed to be a psychologist, but it does. In practice, it does have a calming effect. It creates a framework. It creates a sense of understanding. It creates a sense of rational logic to what is happening. And here we see that the media fail to fulfill probably their mandate, and there surely are lessons to be learnt for the future. And I think it would be useful to compare the Israeli Haredi Jewish model in conclusion to other religious communities in other countries and in other faiths of how they negotiated dilemmas and what was the role of the media during this crisis. Thank you.